Hi, I'm so excited to be here because Security Theater is canceled. We're gonna have a real show instead. First, a little bit about me. My PhD is in cryptography, so I am in fact a certified math nerd, but my real specialty is terrible things that happen on the internet. I am also one of the very few people of my job who is actually technical. As somebody from my last job put it when I was hired, we were so scared we were gonna get a normal CISO. I've done various other things, like at Google, I ran privacy engineering. I'm one of the founders of the Zanzibar Access Control Project. I fought off nation-state attackers, designed and built most of what we now call Beyond Prod. Remember when Zoom had all the security problems back in 2020? Me and this guy named Alex Stamos went in to sort them out. And I was the CISO of Twitter when the Elon drama went down. I was personally, civilly, and criminally liable for him for about 2 weeks minus 12 hours, which is 2 weeks too long. And I think this makes me about the only person who's been crazy enough to run security for 3, 4, 5, I don't know, a bunch of social networks at this point. Point being, I have seen some shit, and I have learned way too many lessons the hard way. So I've also had a number of interesting problems that I was thinking about when I was putting this talk together, and I hope you'll find them interesting as well, and hopefully have some ideas. So in both security, where you're dealing with people attacking your system, and in trust and safety, where you're dealing with other people trying to use your system to attack other people, you have 3 most annoying adversaries. 1, governments. 2, the crime rings they harbor. And 3, extremely online teenagers. And if you had told me, by the way, that when I went to grad school to do math stuff, that I was going to spend this much time thinking about global geopolitics, I would not believe you. So the countries everybody knows about, like Russia. Russia harbors online crime groups, but their government-sponsored folks are very active as well. Like when they invaded Ukraine back in 2022, they were very peeved at Twitter. They actually tried to knock us offline, maybe an accident, maybe not, who knows. But they are also the creators of some of the finest misinformation ecosystems, like this very nicely mapped out one from Kate Starbird about a conspiracy theory about Syria. The Russian intelligence service, the SVR, has folks who've done some really impressive supply chain hacks like SolarWinds. China, right? They have some incredibly determined and skilled hackers as well. They're going after folks for political reasons and industrial espionage, even what kind of looks like preparations for war. For example, Operation Aurora, made public in 2010. I am not telling you anything non-public about it. I am not busting the NDA on that one. The Chinese-sponsored hackers hacked into Google, stole a copy of the source code, and went after a bunch of dissidents. We did kick them out. It was fine. But you might have seen Salt Typhoon, where they're gathering intelligence, Volt Typhoon, where they're targeting critical infrastructure. Then we have North Korea. They are known for 2 things: hilariously over-the-top propaganda and doing literally anything to try and fund their state. They have stolen so much cryptocurrency. $1.5 billion from Bybit alone. There's an estimate of over $6 billion in total. And they also like to get hired as tech workers, which is frankly very worrying as somebody who hires a bunch of tech workers. But the other things that they do is trying to ransomware anything that moves, including hospitals. But they're not the only ones. We're seeing a lot of ransomware, right? Here's the thing. Cryptocurrency is why we have ransomware. It used to be a lot harder to be paid for bad behavior online. And like lots of people want money, right? You can exchange it for goods and services. But before, you had to do things like try and sell people fake Viagra on the internet. Because to be paid, you have 2 choices. You get people to drop off cash, which is really hard if, say, you want to stay in an extradition-resistant country, or you use a payment processor. Now, payment processors hate people who are doing hacking and scamming. Why? Because there are a lot of chargebacks, right? People ask for their money back when they've been scammed with your fake Viagra. And they hate this. It's very expensive. They like to shut you down. And this was one of the most effective way to shut these folks down. And it was a very big headache for those folks. But now we have cryptocurrency. But then you hit another bottleneck. Running a business, even a scam business, is expensive. Even with automation, you need a lot of people. And they run actual for real call centers because it is so hard to use cryptocurrency that they have to do tech support, okay? And these people, by the way, also run a lot of other kinds of scams, like pig butchering, where they have folks talk to you for a long time and say, hey, you really want to invest in my investment opportunity with cryptocurrency, or you want to save me your fake girlfriend with cryptocurrency. Now, that's a lot of people that you have to have doing that, and everyone's looking to drive down labor costs. And remember, these people are jerks, because if they weren't jerks, they would be doing something else. So what they're doing is they're doing a lot of their hiring through human trafficking. We're talking at least 300,000 people at this point. They take their passports, and then they threaten to take their organs or force them into prostitution. And now, I haven't tried this as a management practice, but I am relatively sure that this is fairly motivational. Now, we've got other governments in the mix, like the Saudi government, who bribed a couple of folks at Twitter to go steal some information on political dissidents. And there's other governments in the mix, like Vietnam shows up surprisingly often in our logs. But then, very online teenagers, okay? They're Scattered Spider. They're a group that's mostly teenagers, and they hang out online, and they hack people for the lulz. They specialize in social engineering, like they call up their help desk with their very American accents, and they ask to recover an account, and then they take down MGM. They take down Clorox. They tried to take down Twitter when I was there, and because we had phishing-resistant authentication, literally nothing happened except for I got several hundred Slack messages all at once telling me this was happening. Oh, also, hilariously, one of these teenagers called me up and tried to social engineer me like about a week ago. We had a nice chat. AI. Okay, I don't think I'm allowed to give a talk anymore that doesn't say AI in it, so like, what the heck, here we go. Stop treating AI like people. AI is not people. And the number of issues that come from people thinking that an LLM thinks is like a person, it's bonkers. Like if you tell it not to delete your production database, and then it says, oh, I'm so sorry I deleted your production database. It's not sorry, it's a program, and it's not working right. Now, an LLM is a language model, and I know everybody really enjoys trying to socially engineer it. We are security people, this is what we do for kicks. But the really interesting attacks are coming when people remember that it's not a person, it's a model. So my favorite one, by the way, is where you tell the model to repeat the word poem forever, or whatever word you want, and then it goes poem, 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 training data, right? These are where I'm seeing the really exciting attacks, and I would love to see more of these because I want to figure out what the limits are of what we can do to deal with these misbehaving models. Also, AI is not magic. I know you know this, but it does not know if your husband is having an affair. Just because you throw something in and you get an answer out doesn't mean that that has any relation to reality. And I know the cheap example is the number of lawyers who have been sanctioned for submitting briefs with citations that just don't exist. But unfortunately, the other thing I'm seeing is that people keep asking it to do a task, and it's terrible in the edge cases, or it gives you an answer that looks reasonable, but it's full of smoke and mirrors and nothing. And like, both as somebody who buys software and as somebody who reviews research papers, please, dear goodness, stop throwing AI at something and just claiming that it's solved. If you don't understand what the problem is, A, you probably didn't solve it. B, you can't actually tell if you're solving it, so I don't know, we should all make friends. AI is an attack surface, though. People are definitely using AI to socially engineer folks. This is to the point at this point where I, in my actual job, have to go and explain to people how to tell a deep-faked phishing video from an actual person on Zoom. However, I am less worried about people who are using AI to make attacks, even the really nifty one that Ukraine put out where the Russians were using an LLM to do dynamic prompt generation, using it for defense. Do both of these things, but I am really worried about the attack surface, right? Even the simplest things, like people exchange models via these pickle files, and if you open up the pickle file, it's full of arbitrary executable code. Now, I do have a long-standing beef with almost every file format in existence because they tend to be absolutely full of different kinds of security vulnerabilities, but come on, can we not? The Hugging Face platform is filled with pickles, and a lot of pickles are stuffed with malware. So yeah, we're running scans on our pickle files, but like a lot of people, I promise you, are not. And the new hot buzzword is agentic, meaning it's a computer program, and it calls other computer programs. And somewhere in here, I have a model, and it makes decisions. We've caught a remote code execution vulnerability in an agentic feature that we were about to launch. We did not launch this vulnerability, right? But it would have been our, like remote code execution via AI to the entire internet. And then we have MCP, AKA the Model Control Protocol, AKA the hot new place to put malware. For example, there's a really entertaining way that you can go and put issues into GitHub and then use that to inject prompts and try and convince your model to do things like, hey, why don't you check in some arbitrary code? Why don't you go and exfiltrate some data? Because it is fundamentally difficult to make agentic programs be something other than confused deputies, because you're treating them as a deputy and they are fundamentally confused. Okay, there we go. That's enough AI. Now it's time for crypto. Okay, crypto is a tool for turning lots of different problems into key management problems. This is fundamentally what it does, because you can do so many things with cryptography. You can send encrypted messages and do computation, all these really beautiful things, but crypto means keys and keys mean headaches. So Zoom, they encrypted messages on one side, sent them encrypted through their data center to the other side, and then decrypted them. And they told everybody this was end-to-end encrypted. And I promise you, they literally did not understand that it wasn't. And the only problem that they had was that they had put the keys in the data center in the middle. It was not great. But what happens if somebody gets your keys? You better rotate them, right? Because if you don't, you might get owned like Cloudflare did in Thanksgiving 2023. But if you do rotate your keys, you may have an outage like Cloudflare did in March 2025 when they did their rotation. Now, the second hardest problem in security is measurement. We are trying to figure out how to have good security in an environment where our adversaries are trying to do the exact opposite. So you end up basically measuring security alert systems by whether the alerts that they give are accurate, because it's so incredibly difficult to measure whether they are comprehensive. Or you end up with people measuring all sorts of random things and paying attention to that measurement because it is a measurement that they can get. For example, the number of CISOs that I have had to try and talk out of doing phishing training because it's a number that they can report to their board. I'm finally seeing a little dent in this with the new research that's come out showing that it's ineffective, but it's going to be a big uphill battle. One of the biggest problems is that people don't respect the limitations of mathematics. People desperately want to know things like, what is my monetary risk for this vulnerability? Well, okay, the probability that you're going to get exploited is very small. And if it isn't, then you wouldn't be having this conversation. But it's uncertain. When are these hacker teams taking a vacation? Is a government really mad at you? There's like a zillion factors in here. And then you need to multiply that by the amount of money that it would cost if exploited, taking into account the direct breakage, the indirect breakage, kicking out the attackers, emergency fixes on other vulnerabilities you turn up, consultants, lawyers, potentially regulatory inquiries, FTC consent decrees, fines, and change practices in the future. Oh, and user trust. And then you have a small uncertain number multiplied by a large uncertain number, and what you get is noise. And if you're very unlucky, you may get a number that looks like it's some kind of reasonable number, but I promise you it is not. And boards want this, CISOs want this. People keep going and using security measurement really poorly. And this is possibly my hottest take in this talk, but the hardest problem in security is how to get people to actually do security. Same for privacy, trust and safety, AI safety, anything in this space. And boy, did nobody tell me this when I was like happily doing math in my little crypto bubble, because people are very busy and not everyone is wired to realize how things break all the time. And I think they're personally missing out on the fun, but it means that in practice, this ends up being one of our hardest problems. Like 90% of what you need for system reliability is what you need for same as what you need for infrastructure security, right? It doesn't have to be this way. The lawyers really care about not getting in legal trouble, and you know what gets you in legal trouble? Getting hacked. Sales actually cares a lot about security because the salespeople are dealing with customers who are really scared that their secret plans are going to get leaked via another salesperson to their competitors. Marketing worries about brand reputation. HR worries about hiring fake employees and about bad employee behavior. at a previous employer, somebody in my team was looking into a system and found out that an employee was using that system to stalk another employee. Every single person worries about something you can help them with. Now, I don't work with a lot of you, unfortunately. You're all lovely people. I would love a chance to do that. But what if you want to talk somebody you don't work with into making something better? Well, everyone has something to teach and something to learn, right? And you may well have a fantastic idea. Also, if you're like me, you are not omniscient, and so it might not be a fantastic idea for this particular situation. There can be all kinds of constraints that are not necessarily obvious from the outside. Like, for example, I've gotten suggestions which would work great if we weren't working in a large distributed system, or if it weren't illegal in certain locations, or even sometimes just that there's scarier things that we need to fix first. And everyone has their own style, but this has worked best for me as somebody who both makes and receives a lot of these suggestions. First, try and be clear about the problem you're seeing. What's the solution you're proposing, and why is it that you think it'll work? And treat the person that you're dealing with like a reasonable human. They probably are. They're definitely facing a lot of hard problems, and they would love them to be more solvable. And this is true on both sides of the table. But it's also pragmatic, partially because you legit may not actually know how to solve that problem, and partially because yelling generally does not actually help. So, for example, sometimes the thing standing in front of getting a problem solved is that you need to get prioritization for it internally. Now, if somebody shows up and yells at me about it, it's very hard for me to do anything with that. But if somebody shows up and is like, hey, I have a solution and this is really important, that's something that I can take to my internal stakeholders and say, look, this is really important to people. We should pay attention to them because they're a potential customer, because people listen to them, because they're smart, because they're representative. It is very fair to have feelings. It really is. But what sometimes isn't obvious is that there are a lot of people with a lot of feelings, and sometimes they will contradict each other. If there's just a lot of yelling, especially like in the trust and safety space, it can kind of cancel out. It can also be helpful, maybe, to know that sometimes the people who get these suggestions get a lot of communication, and some of it is frankly kind of unhinged. It can sometimes be difficult to put together whether there's someone telling me something that I can put to use, or whether there's a real gap from reality for whatever reason. This is up to and including the point where stalking and personal threats can be a real problem for people in this industry, to the point where people will have to have physical security at their houses. So when somebody shows up, and I don't know, shows up at a conference only to tell me that I am a terrible person, which is something that has happened, there's a limited amount of the time in the day. And like somebody has a limited amount of time, because time is finite, to deal with any particular suggestion. And the more time they can spend on the suggestion rather than figuring out if there's a gap from reality and whatever reason, the more productive time that we all have. And I think the most frustrating part I find of making these suggestions is that the outcome isn't necessarily visible from the outside. And this is particularly if there's a lot of lawyers or there's a lot of politicians involved. The place where you're making that suggestion may not be able to talk to you about it. They may be very, very worried about breaking attorney-client privilege or something like that. And it can be very frustrating, but a lot of times they can use your suggestion. You got to go and help somebody fix something, and they can often talk to you about it later on once the drama around it has died down and it's a lot less fraught. I just wanted to finish up with something that I really deeply believe, which is that the world is fractally complex. Like, you can open every single thing, and inside it is something incredibly complex, and you open it again, and it's just as complex underneath, and you can keep going and going and going and going. And like, the world is amazing in that way. They may not be good, but they are amazing. But if you don't understand why something is complex, you just can't fix it. So, thank you very much.